The length of the sojourn of the woman in her place is described by John in two different ways. First, he gives the number of days. Joseph Smith, in his inspired translation, changed days to years. The reason for this change will become clear later in our discussion. Secondly, John provides a formula for the amount of time the woman will spend. Before we embark upon an explanation of the duration of the woman's stay in her place, we must first establish the contextual ground rules. Without proper context, the numbers, direct or formulaic, will be misinterpreted. First, we must reiterate that the stay of the woman in her place is in the future, as all things are in Revelation. Furthermore, as we have pointed out earlier, the book of Revelation was written after the invention of crystal glass in the mid-15th century. Neither the book of Revelation or the future events it describes can have occurred prior to 1450 AD, which precludes interpretations such as this. The Church makes the same mistake in its New Testament student manual. The cited reference in section 86 does not support the manual's conclusion. The first three verses are about the parable of the wheat and tares, which speaks of an earlier time when the church was driven into the wilderness. But John speaks of a future harvest, which the next verses in section 86 make plain. Moreover, the earlier church was driven into the wilderness because Satan had choked the wheat of the church with tares. In John's revelation, it is the complete opposite. The woman representing the church flees to the wilderness for protection from the dragon. The church will not be choked with tares. Secondly, the current text of the Revelation is incorrect. Instead, 1,260 days, it should be 1,260 years. Joseph Smith made this correction in his inspired translation. Of course, this invalidates many interpretations that use days instead of years. But many scholars got this aspect right in spite of the corrupt text, recognizing that John was using the so-called prophetic day, where days became years. The origin of the prophetic year is found in the book of Numbers. In Numbers, the Lord extended the Israelites wandering in the wilderness to 40 years, 1 year for each day they had scouted the Promised Land. The third contextual ground is that all numbers in John's revelation are symbolic. The number of days spent by the woman in her place is not a literal chronology. If the number of years of the woman's sojourn, 1,260, were literal, it would have exceeded the length of the millennium, or 1,000 years. That would mean the woman would be still in her place after the end of the world. This would be, obviously, nonsensical. In summary, the contextual mandates are as follows. All events in the book of Revelation are in the future. Days are interpreted as years, and all numbers in Revelation are symbolic. The woman clothed with the sun will reside in her place for 1,260 days, which expands to 1,260 years using the Hebrew day for a year formula. Regardless whether these are to be years or days, the number itself is of primary symbolic importance. For our present discussion, we will consider the time period as days, not years. The first question is, how did John arrive at the number of 1,260? The answer lies, oddly enough, in the amount of days in a year. Currently, we measure the year as 365 and a quarter days, but the ancient Israelites, as other nations, measured the year as 360 days. Immanuel Velikovsky pointed this out in his Worlds in Collision. This sacred year, 12 months of 30 days each totaling 360 days, became the basis of what is known as the prophetic year. That is, it is the year used in the end-of-the-world prophecies, such as Daniel and Revelation. Using the prophetic year as the symbolic basis for our reconstruction, we find the following mathematical results, all of which will aid in the interpretation of the sojourn of the woman, but also in the interpretation of several other events in Revelation. If we divide 1,260 days by 360 days, we arrive at 3.5 or 3.5 years. This matches the last statement of John, time and times and half a time. Each of these calculations will prove useful in our reconstruction. The second time John mentions the duration of the woman's stay in her place, he doesn't use 1,260 days. Instead, he says she will stay for a time and times and half a time. Since one replaces the other, they are meant to be equivalent. The formula of 3.5 times was first used by Daniel. Daniel used the formula in chapter 7 when describing a king who will arise from the dreadful beast in the latter days. Like the beast of John's apocalypse, the king will be given dominion to speak blasphemy against the saints. The dividing of time is the King James translation of the Hebrew meaning half. Most translations use half a time as in Revelation. Some scholars believe that John used the formula in his revelation to agree with Daniel's prophecy. More likely is that both were using a standard prophetic idiom. We must understand that both prophets got their visions from one source, Jesus Christ. The year of the ancient Israelites was 360 days. This served as the basis for the prophetic year. But there was a prophetic month as well. It consisted of 30 days. All months of the year were 30 days each, totaling 360 days, as Immanuel Velikovsky pointed out. By dividing the total number of days of the sojourn of the woman in her place, we arrive at 42 months. 42 months is the duration of two important periods in the apocalypse. First, the outside court of the temple will be given to the Gentiles. They will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. Secondly, the beast will be given to blasphemy for 42 months. These two events are symbolically connected by their equal duration, 42 months. Moreover, since 42 months are equal to 1,260 days, they are symbolically connected to events whose duration is expressed in days. That includes the stay of the woman and also the amount of time that the Lord's two witnesses will have power to prophesy. The correlation of events looks like this. This correlation can't be a coincidence and begs several questions. Why are these events connected by the same amount of time? Why is the duration 42 months or 3.5 years or 1,260 days? That is there a significance to this particular amount of time? Lastly, what does the symbolism of these expressions of time mean? The stay of the woman equals the reign of the dragon or beast, affording protection for the entire duration. This was the purpose of sending her into the wilderness and to her place, away from the dragon and his persecution. In like manner, the two prophets were given protection during the time of their prophecy from the Gentiles and the beast from the bottomless pit. It is only after the time of protection expires that they are killed by the beast. With this in mind, we can partially render the symbolic basis and its interpretation of the 1,260 days, 42 months, or 3.5 years. But there is much more to the symbolism. This does not answer our question of the significance of the number of days, months, and years of the duration. The Church has gone on record to say that the period of 3.5 years, being half of the symbol of perfection and completion, 7, represents a limited period of evil, imperfection, and apostasy. Other biblical scholars agree with this assessment. Seven is the number of the divine. When it relates to time, 7 signifies completion and perfection. After completing the act of creation, God rested on the seventh day and sanctified it. The seventh day of each week was consecrated as a holy day of rest. On the 7th year of servitude, under the Mosaic Law, Hebrew slaves were to be released. The earth is to have 7,000 years of temporal existence, with the 7,000 years as a period of sanctification and rest, where the Lord will complete His work. Underlying the notion of the number 7 as perfection and completeness is a planetary archetype. We've discussed previously the relation of the 7 streamers extending from Venus as the prototypes of the 7 archangels, the 7 heads of dispensations, and other divine or semi-divine characters. But the Lord has also used the type to typify the perfection and fullness of time. The current dispensation is called the dispensation of the fullness of times, precisely because it is the 7th and because it will be the dispensation when all things will be brought to completion and perfect union, as Joseph Smith explained. The three-tiered structure behind the symbolism of the duration of 1,260 days, 42 months, and 3.5 years can be expressed in this way. The reigns of the beast, dragon, and Gentiles, along with the stay of the woman in her place and the period of power given to the two prophets, are ultimately based upon the sacred number 7, which represents perfection and completion. But the durations themselves are only one half of 7, 1,260 days, 42 months, and 3.5 years constitute one half of a full 7 years, which should be 2,520 days, 84 months, and 7 years. As such, these half periods represent incompleteness and imperfection. Half periods of incompleteness and especially imperfection are appropriate for the beast and dragon, which represent opposition to Jesus Christ and his saints. But what about half periods for the woman and the two prophets? How is imperfection and incompleteness appropriate for them? To answer these questions, we must understand that the incompletion of anything less than 7 signifies limitations, shortness, and curtailment. It is broken time. To begin with, the scriptures indicate that giving the woman a half period of time in the wilderness and in her place is merely a form of protection against the dragon. The dragon wanted to devour her child. When the woman left and the child was caught up in heaven, the dragon continued to persecute the woman. The half-time of protection given the woman was a direct result of the power given to the dragon. Though we only learn that the dragon and its beast were given power for a half period in chapter 13, the dragon received its power before the woman received her protection. The woman had no reason for protection if the dragon had not first been given power to persecute her. Moreover, this means that the half period of protection was wholly dependent upon the half period of power given the dragon. That is, the half period does not pertain to the woman, but the dragon. This same pattern applies to the two witnesses and their enemies, the Gentiles and the beast. The witnesses were given power to testify for a half period, but only after the Gentiles, and by implication, the beast had been first given the half period. It is only after this half period, when their testimony had been finished, was the beast allowed to kill them. Again, like the woman, the half period of protection given to the witnesses was secondary to the half period of power given to the enemy. Yet, as we have indicated, the half season means more than just incompleteness. It also suggests limitation, shortness, and curtailment. The half period is a purposeful shortening of the full, perfect period of 7 years. The Lord himself told his disciples that he would shorten the great tribulation of the last days. The Lord intimates that the reason that he will shorten the tribulation will be so that there will be some men left on earth, presumably the elect. Isaiah did, after all, prophesy that there would be a few men left after the burning. But Joseph Smith's restoration tells a slightly different story. The tribulation will be brought upon the Jews and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and not upon the world as a whole. There will be few Jews left. However, according to the covenant made with Israel, some of the elect will be spared. Joseph's restoration is fully consistent with Revelation. It was the church, represented by the woman, that will be persecuted by the beast and dragon. The devil will know that his time will be cut short in the last days. The shortness of his reign will intensify his wrath against the inhabitants of the earth. Not only will the beast, dragon, and Gentiles have their time cut short, the Lord will cut his own work short as well. He will do so in righteousness, according to revelations given to Joseph Smith. The work he will cut short will be judgment, that is, the physical destructions of the earth and its inhabitants. The Apostle Paul told the Roman saints as well that the Lord would cut short his work in righteousness. It may seem contradictory that the Lord will first destroy the world and then end the destruction early, with both considered acts of righteousness. The great judgments upon the earth will be righteous judgments upon the wicked. The righteous need not fear. The Lord considers the great scourge or consumption, which will overflow the land, to be righteous in and of itself. As King David wrote, "All judgments of the Lord are true and righteous." Making an early end of righteous judgment is also righteous, if it fulfills a prior covenant. Another formulation for a half season, short time, or the cutting short of time is a little season. After being bound for the 1,000-year millennium, the dragon, meaning the devil, will be loosed a little season. He will be given power for a half season. In a revelation to Joseph Smith, the Lord repeated the prophecy using the same term, "for a little season." Now, like the dragon and beast of the seventh seal, the pale horseman of the fourth seal was given power over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with the sword, hunger, and death. When the fifth seal opened, the souls of those slain by the pale horseman cried to the Lord for vengeance and judgment. But the Lord commanded them to rest for a little season. The half season of the horseman's power had not yet ended, and there were more saints that would be killed. The Lord used a little season, meaning a half period, in reference to the redemption of Zion. It follows the same pattern as in Revelation, where the kingdoms of the world will be given a short period of power over the saints. The little season is a chastisement for disobedience. The Lord repeated the terms of the chastisement 4 months later. The redemption of Zion will be postponed for a little season while the kingdoms of the world retain power over the saints. Zion will continue to be chastened for this little season until Zion is redeemed. To this day, Zion has not been redeemed. The little season of power given to the world over the saints continues.